Welcome to the Socialite series, where we celebrate and promote women who influence the world. We do this each and every week to bring you information, inspiration, and motivation from socialites who have something to say. I'm your host, Monica Karst. Now let's get this party started. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Tuesday, where we get to do the Santa Cruz Socialites Socialite series. And I'm so excited. This is Monica Karst, and I have a very special guest today, Katharine Teuschler, who is an attorney that practices family law in the Bay Area. She's skilled in all kinds of family law, including divorces, premarital agreements, post-marital agreements, cohabitation agreements, business evaluation. The list goes on and on and on, but we're going to let her talk about why she's so awesome. Katharine, welcome this morning to the call. I am so glad you are here.
Well, thank you so much, Monica. It's my pleasure to be here. I'm such a fan of the work that you do in the Santa Cruz Socialite organization, so I'm happy to participate and talk with you and see what I can add to your program.
Fabulous. Thank you. I know before we get started with any type of law, you always have a disclosure. So why don't you go ahead and get that out of the way?
Right. So listeners, I have to let you know that we're going to talk about California law today, but it's for your information only, and it's not for the purposes of providing you specific legal advice. When you have a case of divorce or any legal case, you need to contact your own attorney because every situation is different and obtain advice from them with respect to any issue that you have. So my opinions are my opinions, and that might not be the opinion of another lawyer given your particular circumstances. With that said, I'm ready to talk about family law, Monica.
Woohoo! Now, you are amazing. You are a badass woman who is also a divorced woman and mother. So you know from heart as well as profession how awful divorce is. Have you ever had a happy divorce?
Well, I will tell you, despite ups and downs, my ex-husband and I get along quite well. And we work very hard to make sure we take care of the kids, do everything that we can in their best interest. And there's not really a happy divorce, but you can divorce with dignity, and you can divorce with respect for the other person. And one of the things that I try to do in this most horrible time of a person's life when they get a divorce is to guide them through the process where they're well-informed, where they're acting with personal dignity. And if there's kids involved, we want them to be sure that the children are protected and their best interests watched out for. But no, there are not really any happy divorces. It's one of the worst times in anyone's life, honestly.
Having personally gone through a divorce, I know has to be, I wouldn't wish that. I have no enemies, but I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy. It was the death of a marriage, and it was treated as far as a death of a marriage. It was scary, upsetting. It was awful and horrible. So I wish I would have had someone like you to help me to go through that process.
Well, it's quite devastating. It really is, because that it is like a death. You lose a person that was so important to you that you married them, right? So, and I recognize that, and especially if there are children involved, I think it makes it even worse. So,
well, you argue about what are the arguments in marriage? Money and kids. What are the arguments in divorce? Money and kids.
That's right. And I think one of the best ways to prevent arguments about money or disappointments about money in marriage when it comes to divorce is to address those issues through a premarital agreement before you even get married. People sometimes have a negative idea about premarital agreements, but I think they are so important to a respectful marriage, to a fully open marriage where everyone knows what their jobs are and everything is disclosed in a manner that is respectful to both parties. So I'm a huge proponent of premarital agreements to help avoid those nasty divorces.
Okay, so go into that since we're starting. That seems like a great place to start is the premarital. Like, you don't go into a marriage thinking you're going to get divorced. It's almost like a stigma or a bad voodoo you're putting on your marriage. So why would someone do that at that point? If you're say in your 20s and you don't really have anything, you have a good job, you have a car, but you don't have a house, you don't have a big savings or a 401k, what will be the point for them? Or is it for someone later on who has a house, who has a retirement? Who is it for?
Well, a premarital agreement can be for anyone, and let's face it, our world has changed significantly in the last 20 to 30 years as far as when people get married. They get married when they're older. They might have been in the workforce and accumulated property for 10 years before they even contemplate marriage. If you're very young and you have no property and you're not involved in a family business, it might not be that you need a premarital agreement. But as you go through life and contemplate marriage, most people get married older, and there are many people who are on their second and sometimes third marriages, right? So it's premarital agreements protect your property that you come into the marriage with, and they let each person know what the financial position of the person they're married is. In California, the law that covers premarital agreements is called the Uniform Premarital Act, and it requires that both parties disclose their assets and debts prior to entering into the premarital agreement, that you have plenty of notice if you're going to make a deal before you get married about who's going to have what property, how we're going to accumulate property. And one of the main things people get concerned about is spousal support, because in California there is strong spousal support laws that protect the person who's not working. So some people want a uniform premarital agreement that says that they don't have to pay spousal support, but there's very specific rules about that written into the law to protect the person that might need the support after a long-term marriage. And to also not allow quick premarital agreements that happen right before a wedding, where someone would present a premarital agreement 3 days before they're supposed to get married and
right.
expect that agreement to hold up and be signed. In California, you have to have independent counsel. Each person has to have an attorney if you're going to try to change the usual obligations of spousal support. And if the agreement's unconscionable, when you bring your divorce after a premarital agreement's been signed, you still might have to pay spousal support. And you also have to give at least 7 days notice before you get married of the agreement. So there's a lot of things that protect people, but premarital agreements, despite seeming somewhat cold and calculated, actually I think create a stronger marriage, because people know financially exactly what their expectations should be, and they know what their expectations as far as being part of a supporting party to the marriage should be.
Right. Well, and then also to bring note that a premarital agreement is not in any way of trust or like a will.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, a premarital agreement can address issues of estate planning. A lot of people place into their premarital agreement certain requirements for life insurance in the event of the death of a spouse. And I would often counsel some of my clients with significant assets to talk to an estate planner and use that estate planning attorney to incorporate those estate planning issues into the premarital agreement and assist with that part of the agreement. They're very important agreements, and in California, especially with and we'll get into this a little bit more when we talk about divorce, the community property and separate property issues that California law has parties deal with in the event of a divorce. They're really, really important to establish expectations at the beginning of the marriage.
Well, absolutely. And it's such a bad, notion. But however, we have insurance on our car, we have health insurance, and it's just an extra protection. And like you said, it saves you so much stress and hell later on if, God forbid, you did go in that direction, but it's not.
And it also saves attorney fees.
Yeah, there you go. So it saves in advance.
In most cases.
Yes. So let's move on to the next one, which is post-nuptial agreements. What is that?
Okay, so people get married, and then during the marriage, one party might want to start a business, and the other spouse might be concerned about the liability that business creates. And they might have an agreement drawn up, a post-nuptial agreement, that says, well, dear, that is your separate property, and you're shouldering all, liability and responsibility for this separate property asset. Some people do post-nuptials after they've entered into marriage and they have a premarital agreement. Perhaps in the premarital agreement there's a component that talks about, spousal support, but then if someone stayed home and worked and while the other parties worked and taking care of the children, so the spousal support component isn't fair anymore because the person's stayed home so long that they might need support if there's a divorce in the future. There's a lot of things a post-nuptial agreement or post-marital agreement can accomplish. If you start a small business with a family member and the small business might want your spouse to sign off on that the business is the separate property and that there won't be any claim in the event of a divorce. Many, many companies require stockholders to have separate property agreements with their spouse. And if the spouse, and that the best way to accomplish that, the most solid way to accomplish that is through a post-nuptial agreement, as opposed to just a two-line, page on a contract that says I waive my interest in this company's spouse, because that agreement doesn't have another attorney representing the party that's giving up the right. So you always want to have an attorney to help you, whether you're on the side that's looking for a waiver of community property interest or whether you're the person who is signing off that this property in a postnuptial agreement is the separate property of your spouse. Everyone needs to be represented so everyone knows their rights, so there can be no claim later that the agreement might be unconscionable. And remember, when you do a post-nuptial agreement, an agreement after marriage, once you marry someone, you're held to the highest fiduciary standard in regard to the community, the assets of the marriage. So post-nuptial agreements actually are very, very important in the fact that they represent an agreement that has to be fully disclosed so everyone understands the ramifications of what they may or may not be signing off on. And because of a spouse's duty, fiduciary duty to the other spouse to put all the cards on the table and make sure they're protecting the community, if people aren't properly represented or don't know their rights, postnuptial agreements can be found unconscionable, right? Because they don't have all the information they need to make an informed choice. So I like postnuptial agreements, especially in the Bay Area. Someone might start a startup or have other business interests that make the other spouse a little nervous about liability. So they're very very effective tools.
Sure. Now, it doesn't include like the stuff that you would have done in a prenuptial, correct? It's just something that's a new business or a new asset.
Well, it can include a modification of agreements that you made in your prenuptial. That's the beauty of the law in California. You can modify and change your prenuptial agreement through a postnuptial agreement. It's all contractual. Okay. And like I said, again, and I really respect California's fiduciary duty laws. They require people to put all their cards on the table, and you have a duty to your spouse in a postnuptial agreement that you don't necessarily have in your premarital agreement. So I think those are really strong agreements. And then they can be used to modify the terms of a premarital agreement, and you can add that as an addendum to your premarital agreement. If for some reason whatever term you have in your premarital agreement doesn't work out for the current circumstances of the parties.
Oh, okay, which leads us on to the very nasty word of divorce, that D word. It's awful and evil and icky. And so let's go there. I don't know how you deal with the stress on the day-to-day basis with having to help people go through this. It's huge. It's a bigger deal than the wedding day. If you think the wedding day is stressful, take us through that. It is. I have a tough job.
One of the benefits of living in our beautiful community of Santa Cruz is after work I can mountain bike, surf, or just get out in the world, and that helps me deal with the stress of my work and play with my two beautiful teenage boys. But divorce is so hard on people, and I always want to protect and help people. And when they go through divorce, I want them to understand exactly what the process is, to really work to protect their kids and to make sure the kids are insulated as much as possible. You can't insulate them totally from the disruption of their home. But people just need to be fully informed and understand the ramifications of the divorce in regard to property, in regard to custody, in regard to child support and spousal support. And they also need to understand that there are many processes they can use as they go through a divorce to make it easier and a more dignified process. So we're very lucky in California to have these superior court systems that address custody through a process requiring parties to first go through orientation, where a person has to sit down with the court, or they can do it online and learn about what they should expect from a custody proceeding, what the expectations of their behavior should be when they go through a custody dispute. And then they go through a process of mediation, and that's required in most counties in California. So that takes the edge off initially. Now, that's not to say that people don't get in very, very high conflict custody disputes with lots of expert psychological analysis, things like that. That does happen. And those are hard cases. But it always comes down to the best interest of the child. And I always encourage people to keep that in mind. Even though they're very hurt and their life is disrupted from the divorce, always try to protect the kids because they'll remember.
Absolutely.
But anyway, so when you start a divorce in California, would you like me to talk about how that all happens, or what questions?
Let's see how and also to go into how being informed. I think the scariest part, at least for women, is we're not informed. We don't know where to go for information, and it's scary. And we just have so much going on for us, and we're so emotionally attached to the kids and the kids and the kids. And if you have kids and it's involved in that, but you lose sight of there's so much more out there, so much more information, and to seek the knowledge.
We're really
so
lucky.
You have the power.
Yeah, so we live in the internet age, and I will have to tell you, most courts have very, very fine websites that help you understand the process, the papers that you have to file, the considerations that you might need to make. Generally, when it comes to filing for a divorce, the court requires that you execute forms that keep you on track to help you understand what issues you need to address and what matters you need to be concerned about. So when you file your petition for divorce, you file information that says that your marriage is irretrievably broken, that you're seeking perhaps custody orders, property division, child support, spousal support, whatever you're seeking. These little forms, you can just check them off, and it helps the court understand the issues that are presented in your case. And then when you're talking about some women might feel that they don't have all the information or don't know what to do, each party in California is required to fill out what's called a declaration of disclosure. And they have to list all of their assets, all of their debts, and that helps pinpoint the issues of property. On that declaration, they also can indicate whether or not they believe certain property or certain debt is separate or community. So when you get married in California, any property that you obtain during the marriage is considered community property, except if you can show that it's separate. Separate properties, property obtained prior to marriage, property obtained after date of separation, and also property that's inherited or gifted to you, and that kind of accumulation of property. So when you go through the divorce process, you're both required as spouses, when you get a divorce, to disclose all of those issues to the other, and it's part of the fiduciary duty in California. In fact, if you do not disclose all of your property or you try to hide something, you can lose 100% of the value of that property if that kind of nasty, risky behavior is discovered.
Wow.
So California protects the property of a marriage, and the community property of a marriage is always benefits first.
So can I interrupt you for just one
Sure.
second? What is that form called so that we can look at? So if somebody's in that process to look at to make sure it is correct.
It's on most websites, and you have to exchange it with the other person. You do that through a process of service. You do a service of process on the other spouse. FL 142, FL 140 are what they're called in California. And you can look it right up as either a preliminary declaration of disclosure or a final declaration of disclosure, which is done on or around trial.
So
also,
SL
is a part of
142 And SL 140. So when you ladies get that piece of paper, that's what you're going to look at to see what assets are being involved. Because you get a big stack of paper, you don't know what this stuff is. You don't look at it. It's overwhelming. So this is what you need to look at.
Yeah. So, and on top of that, the Declaration of Disclosure also requires the parties each fill out an income and expense declaration. So you look at what their income is, what their expenses are. The court uses income to establish child support. That's put into a program that's approved by the state of California, and each party's income and other factors are considered, and it lets you know what your child support should be. Spousal support is a much bigger issue. When you first file for a divorce, you can get temporary spousal support, which is also calculated using an income tax-based program. However, if you don't, when you get to the end of your case, when you get to the point where it's a permanent spousal support award, the court can't use that program and has to use consideration of 14 or so factors in a statute called 4320 in the California Family Code. And when they consider those factors, they consider the length of the marriage, if one party stayed home and took care of the children, the health of the parties, the marital standard of living, how the parties live. They try to have each party maintain close to the marital standard of living, but you have to understand when two people separate. But I did want to talk about, before our day or time ends, about the different processes you can use to get through a divorce without necessarily going through a big trial and spending tons of money on attorneys and fighting in front of a judge. There are so many very, very good processes of resolving your divorce outside of a trial before the court. And people get really nervous about that. Many people settle their case through negotiations with their lawyers, and you want a lawyer that can negotiate and understands the law, and through mediation, and that might be a mediation process. I'm a certified family law mediator, so sometimes people come to me, usually two attorneys with their client, but sometimes it's just two people that think they can work it out together, and they just want to have a mediator to help them reach an agreement. So mediation is a great process for resolving your divorce if you can and feel like you're fairly treated. The thing that I always am very concerned with mediation is both parties are fully informed of their rights and the strengths and weaknesses of their arguments before they make any agreement. In California, there's also collaborative law. And in a collaborative law divorce, both parties agree that they're going to go through a process of collaboration. If they have attorneys, the attorneys agree that they're engaged in the process and that those attorneys will not represent the parties in any legal proceeding before a court. So it's very focused on staying out of the court system, looking at all the issues of the case. Collaborative law can involve experts in custody, experts in financial issues, forensic CPAs that look at different property tracings and information regarding support and income available for support. So collaboration allows the parties to agree at the forefront that they will not go to court. If collaboration falls apart, which sometimes it does, then they can go back to the process of the litigation track through the courts. And that's where you ask a judge to decide, because you can't agree amongst yourself what the resolution of the case should be. Many people settle their cases. And
that's good to know.
That's a great thing, and I really think that mediation is a worthwhile process for many people.
Is there something or items to point out to the listeners of mistakes that have been made, or tips that you can offer, or something that's overlooked often? Absolutely.
I think the most important thing, especially if you don't have a premarital agreement, is to keep yourself apprised of the state of the marriage, the state of the children, the state of your finances, the state of your investments. We are in a world now where women are working, they're running companies. It's really dangerous for a woman with young children, perhaps a stay-at-home mom, not to understand financially where the marriage is at. Unfortunately, a lot of people get divorced. So you don't want to do it in a pre-planning divorce way, but you want to be sure you understand the financial state of your marriage. And I think people need to understand, too, that if you do get a divorce, even though you've been a stay-at-home mom for a few years with your kids, you're going to be expected to support your children and to support yourself. And you'll have to go out and get a job or get skills to become employed. So I think the biggest red flag I see, and the thing that concerns me the most when clients come through the door, and they're lovely, kind, wonderful people that are going through the worst experience of their life, is that they haven't been responsible about the financial aspects of their life. And
I'm so glad you brought that up.
It really creates it creates a lot of anger and stress and disappointment, and unmet expectations are all wound into that. So keep track of your finances and understand what your investments are and how much your house is worth. And just the other thing that I think people forget to do when they get married or during marriage is a lot of people get inheritances, they get gifts, a parent might contribute to the accumulation of an asset, they might have a family business. You need to be very conscientious about protecting your separate property, and that if you decide not to protect it and add it to the community, you need to do that with knowledge that you are doing it intentionally and that you might not get this property back in the event of a divorce. So I think being intentional in regard to property also creates a much better relationship and expectations that don't, create a horrible contentious divorce.
Oh,
right?
So true. Absolutely. I mean, you've given such great advice, and I think that's the best way to close and end here is because divorce is not pretty. You're here to help them, which we're going to need to find out all your information, how to reach you. But there are ways to protect you. Don't go into a marriage to end a marriage. However, there are ways to protect everyone involved so that if it does happen, it's easier to get to separate. And then there's also the knowledge beforehand of just really knowing what your finances and home is, and to really know what's going on, because you're right in this day and age that women don't know. So thank you for bringing that up and reminding us. Tell us how to reach you. Where are you? Give us a phone number, email, so that...
Sure. You can look at my profile at greenfieldlaw.com, GREENFIELD, law.com. My name is Katharine Teuschler. I'm the family law attorney in this busy practice. One of the nice things about my practice is we bring more to the table than just family law. So we have a lot of business litigators, and it's a great firm, Greenfield, Dre, and Harrington. And if you want to call me, 408-995-5600. Be happy to help anyone that might need it.
Yes. And Katharine lives right here in sunny Santa Cruz. She knows the culture. She knows divorce. She knows kids, and she is awesome. Anything you want to end with? Last words.
No, thank you so much, Monica, for inviting me, and I enjoyed talking with you this morning.
Thank you for being here. I appreciate it, and for the advice, and also just being that friendly face so that we know who to call if we do need to go through that ugly D word.
And I hope no one does, but all right. Have a great day.
Thank you so much for being on. And that, with everybody else, that is a wrap. This is Monica Karst reminding you every day is a day to celebrate. Cheers. Thank you for tuning in to the Socialite series. To find out more, visit us at santacruzsocialites.com and monicakarst.com. Until next week, be seen and be heard, and get out and shine your social light on your community.